Hello and welcome to Chat with Dr. Kat. I'm Dr. Kat. It is nice to see you today. On today's episode, we have Abby Skegin-Sipes. So excited to have her on this episode today. We are going to be talking about speech pathology, what it's about, what is it needed for, and everything about speech, the things that she is doing in her life, her passions that led to this decision of becoming a speech pathologist, which it sounds like I need someone right now. Anyway, Abby, hi. It's so nice to have you on board today. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited. I can't wait. And yeah.
Okay, so everybody out there, before we get started, just remember no fluff, no judgment, just real talk that leads to real change. So sit back, enjoy this conversation that we're going to have today. She's going to give you some tips throughout our conversation today. But I encourage you just to sit back and listen and then go back and watch it again. And then you can take your notes. Because sometimes when we're taking notes, we're not really listening fully. So just sit back, relax, and let's start right away. So, what led you to become a speech pathologist?
Ah. So this is a bit of a journey that kind of started all the way back in high school. And for the longest time, growing up as an athlete, I feel like every other athlete wants to be a physical therapist. And I always kind of knew that I wanted to be within the realm of healthcare. It was kind of more or less of what it was going to be. So I was applying to schools with physical therapy. And of course, my mother, I love her to death, but the mother that she is, she consistently pushed me. She consistently tried to get me to go into this field because it is such an incredible field. And for the longest time, I pushed back. Every high school student pushes back on their parents. They never want to
Sure.
listen. It's reality. But at some point, after months of pushback, I finally was like, you know what? Let me just dive in and really see what is it about, because I really didn't know much about it. So I did my research and I kind of was like, ooh, okay, this is interesting. I can see me being in it. There's a lot of different avenues that I can take. I can work with a million different age groups. So I did. And then I ended up actually shadowing one of our old family friends. And from that moment on, I absolutely fell in love with it. And I knew that this was going to be a place for me. And so I switched my major all itself when I was applying in high school. And I ended up going into my bachelor's as well as my master's, all with speech pathology in mind. And now here we are, several years later.
So, for someone who doesn't know what it is, could you define it for us? What it is exactly that you do?
Yes. So speech pathology is a field where, kind of how I had mentioned earlier, it has so many different avenues. You can work within the education system, private clinics, private practices, home health, the hospitals, or the medical realm of things. You can work with early intervention, literally across the lifespan. So early intervention, school-aged, adults, young adults, all the way into geriatrics. And we have something that we call our big nine. So we've got articulation, we've got language, so that falls under expressive and receptive language. You have voice, fluency, swallowing or eating disorders, pragmatics or social communication, and all sorts of things like that. AAC is one of them, so alternative and augmentative communication, which is essentially just a very fancy way of saying alternative modes of communication,
Okay.
whether that's gestures, sign language, pointing, using a communication device, whatever it may be. But we have all these different avenues that a lot of people don't really realize are there. And oftentimes when you mention, and I've come across it several times when when I tell somebody, hey, I'm a speech therapist, they're like, oh, so you deal with kids with speech impediments or lisps or stutters. And it's like, yes, we do, but there's so much more to it. And then we really go into it and, people are very surprised by what we do. And another really big thing is we deal with cognition, so
Mm.
memory and the understanding of everything. And that more or less plays a role in the medical aspect of things, but it is still one of the, big nine areas that we really look at.
So, Now you've started a company called Sunshine Speech LA. So tell us
Yes.
about that and what you do with that company.
Yes, so it is up and coming. I am very excited to start this new journey in my path, like this path of my journey in my life and this new chapter. And I really wanted to open speech, Sunshine Speech LA, to allow for me to work within the most vulnerable of populations. And that is specifically early intervention, pediatrics. And I wanted to provide this platform and this accessibility to allow for these children to gain the services that they need by jumping, that start and being able to come in at a time where it is such a crucial and vulnerable time in their lives because that's their most developmental time period
Sure.
is those ages from 0 to 3. And oftentimes that parent education aspect of it is oftentimes overlooked. So I really wanted to be able to provide that parent education to
Hmm.
families as well. Because, there's only so much that I can do. I can come in and I can do therapy services with a student or a child or an adult or whoever it may be. But if that's not continued by the parent, that kind of just falls off and then we're not seeing that progress that we would like to see. So I really wanted, in general, just wanted to provide this facility and to be able to give parents that opportunity to allow for their children to get the services that they need at that early age, at that primary major developmental mark, while also providing, that parent-centered parent education, that play-based, and just come in and really do that and provide what they need and hopefully make a mark and all of that.
You know, just listening to you talk right now, what's so important for parents is to feel comfortable and to feel that they understand what truly is going on with their child. Because oftentimes, with what I do, I have parents that come in and there's a lot of denial, there's a lot of discomfort.
Mhm.
You have one parent that's on board, another parent that's not on board, yet what I'm hearing from you, the most vital time for them to get the help is when they're at a younger age, which makes complete and utter sense. So I want to talk a little bit more about that psychological aspect, but what would you say are some of the most common issues that people come to you with?
I love this. Oftentimes parents are like, I don't understand my kid. They're not communicating. I don't know how to communicate with them. What can I do? My child isn't understanding me. And I feel like that's also one of the biggest misconceptions is just because your child isn't communicating doesn't mean that they don't understand.
Right.
Um, so, that kind of also ties into what am I doing with Sunshine Speech LA? And that will allow for, us to kind of bridge that gap and being able to really determine how can you effectively communicate with your child? How can they effectively communicate with you?
Hmm.
Whether, it's that verbal communication, whether it's those signs, those gestures, whatever it may be, but to break those communication barriers. And again, parents always come to me with that and
Oh, I'm
I,
sure.
I don't know. The biggest one is I don't know how to communicate with my child. They're not communicating with me. They do not understand.
And
So
it's
yeah.
frustrating. For a
Okay.
parent, you want the best for your child. You want the child to be working at a capacity where they're going to have normal interactions and what we deem as normal out in the community and in their
Right.
environments or in their preschools or wherever they're going. So I can see where that causes a lot of stress and anxiety, and it leads to places where it's maybe stunts communication because of the
Yeah.
level of
Yeah.
frustration. So when you get parents in, what do you do that makes them feel comfortable so it doesn't feel as clinical and it feels a little bit more natural?
I am strictly play-based. So I go in, I don't really like to go in and have that drill the way that you would see in that clinical type environment. I'm very play based in a sense of I come in with my own play materials, or
Mhm.
I'll utilize the child's play materials or whatever they're comfortable with. And, oftentimes it doesn't look like I'm doing therapy at all, because all you're seeing is we're reading or we're playing games or we're doing arts and crafts, whatever it may be. But what people don't realize, and I feel like oftentimes parents don't realize, that this play environment is what is the naturalistic setting for
Mhm.
children. They're very comfortable in their own environment, in their own play area, and tailoring, therapy services to that and what children are most comfortable with is where you're really going to get those gains of communication. So really strictly that play aspect of it all, rather than the structure and the routine and this and that, and just grilling the child. You're not really going to get much effect from that. You
No.
might, but when a child is that young, you really want to kind of preface it on that play based.
Well, I also think that, children will feel fantastic about coming in to see you or waiting for your appointment when you come and see them, knowing that it is going to be play based, because it
Yeah.
becomes more exciting and they don't feel like something is wrong with them. They feel this feeling that you're someone there that is now a new part of their life that they play with. Even therapeutically with play therapy, kids say things while they're playing, or they're, modeling a conversation between two dolls,
Yes.
and you really see, whoa, I can see what's going on there, or maybe some of the frustration. So when you're doing play therapy, obviously that lends itself to very young kids. So what is the best age for someone to come in, and what is too early?
I never think therapy is too early.
Okay.
And that's why we see that early intervention services are so crucial and they're so big and popular, is because when you get into that core developmental time, that's where their language is really growing. That's where they're growing as individuals and kind of finding themselves at such a young age. So I would never say that too early, like early is too early.
Mm-hmm.
If, there's any
I
sort of
see.
concerns or hesitation or whatever it may be, you want to take those steps and you want to
Mm-hmm.
be able to get into that crucial time. So yeah, early is never too early.
I think back to my oldest daughter. She had this slight little lisp, and she would say things like, instead of saying so, though, and I saw the little tongue come out, and I went to my neighbor who is a speech expert all those years ago, and I went over to her, and she says, she was so sweet. She did. She sat down on the floor with her right away. She looked into her mouth to see the shape of her tongue, but again, playing games. And she had her look in the mirror. I think my daughter was probably 2.5. She was an early talker, maybe almost 3, very early talker. So speech was not an issue, but that little tongue thrust was coming out. So I remember she said to her, clench your teeth like this and then say, so? And she says, if the tongue thrusts out, she gave me this whole explanation. Lo and behold, it was just something she needed to practice. But how many hours had I already worried or thought about it, or all of those things? As parents, this is what we do. And yes, I had my neighbor that was very accessible to me, but that just was my life. I had that accessibility. But I had to have the courage to come out and say, hey, this is what's going on. Because again, oftentimes parents do feel that they don't want to point out something that's a negative, rather than fix something to have the child be able to relate better in life, not have issues, have solutions, and all of that. So I am forever grateful that I had that time with her, because it was an easy solve. It was an easy solve. We did a couple of follow-up things, and, that was it. But if I hadn't have done that, I'd always be thinking about it. right?
Mhm.
So, everyone that's watching today, I really do encourage you to reach out and find out what are some things that you can do. Sometimes it could be a simple conversation to find out what needs to happen and then start the process. Don't spend time worrying and thinking about these things, that just gets us to a place of anxiety, discomfort, which then ultimately leads to avoidance. So let me ask you this, Abby. What are some simple things that parents can do at home? I just gave you an example of what happened to me, but
Mhm.
what are some simple things that parents can do at home to support communication with that child that's maybe not communicating?
Yeah, so super, super simple. You don't need any fancy toys, no fancy materials, nothing. All you need is yourself. All you need is a child. Literally, absolutely nothing. Pause, take a moment, and really, get down to your child's level. Be able to engage in something that they want to do. Again, reiterating that play-based, right?
Okay.
Or even taking everyday tasks and simplifying them and creating them into very simple layman phrases. So, for example, go, open, more, but just talking to your child in those very simple ways and communicating with them and constantly engaging with them and having that conversation, whether they're responding to you or not. But just, very, very simple, taking that and taking repetition. Repetition is very important.
Mm-hmm.
So taking that repetition through everyday activities, through everyday routines, the more that, they get into it and they have this repetition, the more that
Are
they're
you are you talking about
likely to pick up.
labeling things as they're going, say,
It could
around
be
the
labeling.
kitchen,
Yeah, it could be
stove?
labeling.
Okay.
It could just be everyday communication. So, for example, let's say, I'm taking out a cup and I'm going to fill it up with water. It's like, oh, cup, water, and you're like filling it up. Or, oh, open when you're trying to open a book or you're trying to open a package or a bottle, whatever it may be. Or if you're about to start an activity, what I really love to do, specifically with bubbles, is I'll take it and I'm like, ooh, ready, set, and they fill it in. Go.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, I give them that preface first until they get used to it, and I keep going and going with that repetition until I can get the child to even say go. Um, so just that repetition
I
and that
like that.
play and getting down to the
Yeah.
child's level.
And when you say getting down to the child's level, are you talking about literally physically getting down to their level, eye level, or are you talking about communication? Are you talking about all of it?
All of it.
All of
You
it.
can get down to the level of a child physically
Okay.
and being able to sit on the ground and play with them and get them to be a little bit more comfortable because nobody wants to feel, especially when you're at such a young age, you don't want anybody to feel like they're powering over you, they're hovering over you. That's very intimidating. And that it could potentially, lead to the lack of communication because they might be scared or they might have that
Sure.
anxiety or whatever it may be, those negative emotions that you don't want to necessarily bring out that could hinder communication. So
Hmm.
physically getting down to that level to meeting that child and being able to facilitate and just play one-on-one, whether you're physically interacting with the kid or you're having that parallel play where you're playing next to them, anything. Talking, like I said, you don't have to
So
physically
important.
get down to the level, but talking at those very, very simple one word, two, three-word
Sure.
phrases,
Mm-hmm.
that are very simple for the child to understand. You don't want to bombard them with a million and one things that they're not going to understand because then they're going to start getting confused and
Mm-hmm.
they're not going to understand how to process everything. So that can really play a role into it as well.
I think sometimes with parents, adults in general,
Mhm.
we have learned a different form of communication, obviously. Our expectation is that the child understands. I'll have parents that will come in and they'll talk to me and say, oh, my child understands. How would they understand? They haven't had that life experience. That's not possible. They're understanding the words that you're speaking, but they don't
Mhm.
understand the impacts. They don't understand the emotional connection with those things.
Right.
So I like that you pointed that out, that it is really important to be able to speak to a child using simplified words that they understand and that they relate to. And
Yes.
also, if you do stand over them, I like that point that you made, because it is true. It can be very intimidating, just the height difference. So
Hmm.
being able to sit down and take the time to work with your child, these are great tips that you're giving us. I like that. So then let me ask you this. There's people listening and they
Hmm.
have children at home who are probably having some speech issues, or they have a friend with a child that has a speech issue, or they have a relative and they're trying to figure out different ways. So this is kind of a two-parter. Well, for those parents that are sitting by right now with a child that has a speech issue or they're not communicating, what could you say to them if they're hesitating from coming in and seeking help?
Right. Just do it. You never know what, parents might be scared, parents might be confused and really unsure or overwhelmed, and that's probably one of the biggest things that parents are feeling. But if I don't know how to, emphasize it
Hmm.
enough, but just do it. And, the worst comes to worst is, you go and you seek and you advocate for your child, you seek that assistance that you're wanting or that you might need. And worst comes to worst, the therapist does what they need to do and they say, no, your child's fine, it's okay. Or, that's the
Hmm.
worst that can come out of it. Or, you come in and it's like, yeah, all right, this is what we can work on.
Right.
Let's see what we can do. But just reaching out and advocating is the number one thing that you can do to support, whether you're overwhelmed, whether you're scared, because just by doing that and getting that parent education that you're going to be able to do is not only going to benefit your child, it's also going to benefit you.
Hmm. I like
So,
your approach. Your approach is very much not about just treating the child, you're treating the family as a whole. And that
mhm.
is very, very important. And oftentimes I don't see that as much. So I like that you have that distinction, because it is important to treat the family as an entirety, this
Mhm.
whole group of people that are struggling with the issue. And oftentimes, I think the parents probably need a little bit more intervention and hand holding, because the child may not know the difference.
Mhm.
My concern comes into play when you have children that continue to go through school. Now they're getting into fourth grade. I always think
Mhm.
fourth grade to fifth grade is kind of pivotal. Fourth grade, they're still very respectful and kind. Fifth grade, they're really starting to gain that independence,
Yeah.
which sometimes means that they get mean. Now, not all children
Yep.
are beautiful. I have children, as everyone knows, but sometimes children can become mean. And a lot of times it's because they don't understand what's going on. They don't understand why a child is not speaking, or they don't understand why a child has a speech impediment or sounds different. There's different pronunciation of words.
Right.
And oftentimes, rather than saying, hey, why do you speak like that? Some children do say that. Other ones will begin to poke fun. So, what do you say to that? Do kids come in and they ever have that experience? Do they have that experience where they're getting poked fun at?
Yes. So
Right?
I'm actually currently in the schools. I'm currently working within the schools. So it's actually a very common thing that I probably deal with on a weekly basis. So it's a lot more common than people think it is. But there's been times where one of my kids, he is a stuttering kiddo.
Mm-hmm.
And in that group, we had a kid who would make fun of him and, would poke those jokes. Or I also had a kid who was working on articulation and he couldn't produce his R's properly.
Mm.
Um, and those kids in the group would start making fun of him or whatever it may be. And I really just need to look at the kid, the entire group. I don't like to specifically hone in because I don't like pointing kids out in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because that in and of itself can create a very negative
Of
effect.
course.
So kind of just addressing the entire group as a whole and being like, hey, we're all here for the same reason. Whether it is the same reason, whether we're working on different things, we're all here for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
You might be working on this sound, but this person might be working on this sound, and that's okay. It's like, it's happening. We're all, you have come in here because we're all working and needing to improve on something.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And oftentimes children don't realize that. And they wonder, oh, why do they sound like this? But I can say it perfectly fine.
Right.
Every kid is different.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we need to understand is every kid is going to develop differently. They're going to say things differently. They're going to speak differently. They have their own personalities. And sometimes kids have a very difficult time understanding that. And just I say it very simply. I'm like, hey, we're in here for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
Just because you can say it doesn't mean he can say it. You're very different than this person is. You're a very different person than that, right? And that's okay. We might all be different, but we're all here for one reason and one reason only.
Mm-hmm.
And then kids typically understand it and it cuts it out immediately.
I like the way you normalize that. You're normalizing differences. That's vital with kids because they do come with differences. As human beings, we all come with differences. Maybe it's speech, maybe it's running differently, maybe it's walking differently, different hair colored, everything different about kids. So I like that you take that to the next level of normalizing differences, even within speech and even within the group of kids experiencing speech issues. I really like your positive approach. You're very positive, which lends itself to the name of your company, Sunshine. You are a bit of sunshine, especially the way you speak. You really do take the kids' feelings into consideration. When people go to seek out professionals, you want them to have that connection. You want them to have the joy of what they're doing, which does come out in what you say. So I really do appreciate that. And I know our viewers do as well. You want to feel comfortable with the professionals that you seek out. The great part now about our world is it doesn't have to be just somebody in your community. It can be someone through the internet that you can speak to, and it doesn't have to just be, okay, you're in Southern California, you can only see this person in Southern California. I'm assuming with some of the kids that you see that are even a little bit older, that can handle being online, because most schools put them online very, very early. I know my daughters years ago already had an iPad in first grade, learning how to do things. So
they're on those Chromebooks, they're on those computers,
right?
those iPads. Yep.
All of that. So with your practice, do you see yourself expanding in that way also, seeing people outside of your community environment and opening it up to the... Yeah. Okay. So
absolutely. 100%.
Tell me about that. You're expanding yourself. So again, not just your neighborhood, not just where you're at. Mm-hmm. You seem very comfortable online. How do you think kids would relate to you online?
Again, with that whole play aspect of it all, yes, it is much more difficult to create those connections online than it is in person, right? And I've experienced that firsthand. I'm sure you've experienced that firsthand. Other students, other kids in general, parents. But creating that environment and doing things that the kids are interested in, kind of how I had mentioned earlier, finding those things that kids want to do.
Right.
And I have 1,000,001 online platforms where I can pull activities from, whether it's worksheets, games, videos, whatever it is. And you can very easily tailor that towards a child and tailor it towards their needs, their desires, their wants, what they're interested in, to be able to kind of help mend that connection and to build that rapport. And maybe even, I'm really big at building rapport when I first meet kids. I typically take the first 2, 3, sometimes even 4 sessions with a child just to build that rapport and that connection, because connection is bigger than anything, and it's always going to come over communication, because if a child is not connecting with you, you're likely not going to get that communication of any sort or that comfortability, you're not
Right.
going to see it. So sometimes even taking that extra little time to build that rapport and really getting to know the child, and for the child to really get to know you, that way they're comfortable, because it is so much harder through a screen, right? So finding that extra little something and reading the kid and really
Mm-hmm.
getting to know the kid, I think is going to be a lot more important than you finding and feeling that physical connection that you would when
Face
you're
to
sitting
face.
down next
Yeah.
to a kid, right?
Well, and it's
So
where
yeah.
they are, right? If you have an older child, there's so many things that you can do, all the things that you had mentioned about connecting with them, but they are online. And
Mhm.
sometimes you have the issue of scheduling also, not able to physically get somewhere or physically have someone come over, but you still
Right.
want them to have that connection. We've become very busy. We've become very, very busy and overscheduled. And oftentimes, things that we need and things that our
Mhm.
children need get overlooked because there's so many other things that are going on. You've got school, you've got dance, you've got sports, you've got clubs, Girl
Mhm.
Scouts, Boy Scouts. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And well, you're an athlete, it's extensive, right?
Mhm.
So, but we have to take the time. We have to take the time because fixing something with speech, I mean, speech, it's so much there. Now, we have other people that have lived their life, but they are not the average person, and they've been able to learn how to communicate different ways because speech never came to them. But that is not the average human being. The average human being, this is how we relate. We
Right.
relate through eye contact, we relate to all these different things, but it is speech. So even when you travel to a different country, and you're unable to have the same way of communicating, it becomes very difficult. We try to act out different things, but when it really comes down to it, it is that speech. We want to be able to communicate. So it has been wonderful having you on today. Really wonderful, Abby. You have
Thank
a
you.
fabulous energy that I think is just so conducive with working with children. And I'm sure with adults as well, but your target area is really to get this when they're young and impressionable and able to make those changes much more readily. So you were fantastic. Fantastic. Again, like I said, I absolutely love your energy. Listen, if you find your child struggling with speech, please take a moment, reflect, pull your emotions together, figure out a way to get yourself to reach out and seek help. Seek help, because eventually that speech issue is going to continue to either get worse, or their feelings around it may become worse. So if you can intervene at an early age, that would be best. Give your child that fighting chance in everything that they do. We want the best for our children. And sometimes it is seeking out things that may be uncomfortable for us. And other people may say, let me have the information now. I'm ready to go. So
Mhm.
on the website, Chat with Dr. Kat, you're going to have a direct link to Abby Skegin-Sipes and her company, Sunshine Speech LA. Please don't hesitate. Reach out. Not only does she see people in her community in Southern California, but she sees people nationwide. So get ready to reach out, make the change that your child needs in order to give them that wonderful opportunity on life and to make things as easy as possible. Life can be difficult, but if there's things that we can do in our power to create change that leads to success, why not? Abby, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank
As
you so
all,
much for having
I'm
me.
so glad you were here. I'm telling you, I'm so glad you're here. You present things very simplified. And again, I love how you bring the entire family as a unit to work together for a common goal. Brilliant. So, chatwithdrkat.com. Any information you would like on Abby will be right there for you. When you see this being presented, look at the bottom. You're going to have links directly to Abby as well. Have a wonderful, wonderful rest of the day. I'll see you soon.